So I've been wanting to make this video for a while now, um, just mostly as a reminder for myself on how to install Arch, but also if it's any help to anyone out there. I know some of the Arch Linux installation guides are kind of hard to follow along with. You either have the convoluted mess that the Arch wiki can kind of become, or you have this one size fits all article that you found off of Google that kind of takes you through it, but doesn't really explain what's going on. To preface a little bit, I'm not a Linux guru or a Linux master in any way, shape, or form. I don't really have an IT background at all. I teach music for a living. I've only really been using Linux for about, I would say, 9 months at this point. Last year, so summer 2020, I really got fed up with Windows 10, mostly their user experience and their user interface. I just hated the artifacts that were left over from, Windows Vista, Windows 95, Windows 7, some new stuff created for Windows 10. Just all of this design language coming together in an ungodly mess of an operating system, where drop-down menus, is always kind of a crapshoot what they would look like, and then there's no consistency across applications. Again, I'm sure you guys have heard it before. What Windows does really well is provide legacy support for, decades worth of software, which is kind of amazing in its own right. If you're a payroll company and you're using software written for Windows that came out in 2001 or 1997, it probably still works. And it should still work, because if they were to do, something like Apple, where they said, over the next couple of years, we're phasing out x86 architecture altogether, we're moving to this ARM-based architecture, you guys need to catch up or we're dropping you from the App Store, that company's kind of out of luck. So Windows does that really well. I don't want to have this turn into a Windows bashing video. But what I got fed up with that design language last summer, 2020. And in that time, I kind of started operating system hopping, if that's a thing. So I installed Chrome OS. I think it's called Cloud Ready, because you can't actually install Chrome OS on non-Chromebook or non-Google hardware. So I installed Cloud Ready to get the Chrome OS experience. I enjoyed it at the time. I was really, really into Google. That's a video for another time. And there's just something lacking in the ability to install proper programs, proper executables. The progressive web apps have come a long way. I think for probably, let's say, 60% of computing, a Chromebook is fine. If all you need is a word processor and something to access the internet and social media with, don't spend any more money than a Chromebook. That's really all you need. But I needed a little bit more, especially in the way of audio production. Again, I teach music, so I needed a way to record my students, especially during the pandemic when we were distance learning. The Chromebook just didn't have the power or the features to do what I wanted it to do. So after the Chromebook or Chrome OS, I jumped back to Windows for a little bit just to get some work done. Then when I had some downtime, I installed Mac OS. So there's this whole wonderful Hackintosh scene that kind of helped me out in that regard. I was fortunate enough to have purchased a ThinkPad T480S before I really jumped into all of this computer stuff. And what's been wonderful about this computer in particular is I haven't had compatibility issues at all with any operating system that I've installed on here, with the one exception of my, I believe it's an Intel wireless card that wasn't compatible with Mac OS. So while I was running Mac OS, I had to use a USB Wi-Fi adapter or network adapter. So aside from that one hiccup, everything else has run great. And when I came over to Mac OS, I thought maybe I had found the solution to my problems. But it turns out that Mac OS is kind of following the same suit as Windows 10. There's a lot of inconsistencies in design. they're starting to import a lot of iOS into Mac OS. So some applications look more like apps, some application looks like proper programs. I just kind of, and then it came with a lot of what I would consider bloat. Like, I don't need a calendar manager app. I don't need an email manager app. I don't need a lot of the programs that Mac OS natively installs on their operating system. I don't use it and I don't really need it. And when I saw it at the bottom on the taskbar, it just kind of pissed me off a little bit. So I kind of abandoned Mac OS. It just wasn't suiting my needs. And then after a couple more playing around with Windows and Chrome OS back and forth, I finally talked to one of my good friends, Nicholas Hankey, about Linux. I had known that he had done the Linux thing, or he had been doing the Linux thing for probably a decade at this point, maybe longer. And I just kind of started, picking his brain a little bit about what Linux had to offer. At that time, I wasn't really concerned with anything other than just something pretty and something with consistent design. And so after talking to him, I decided on Elementary OS, and from that point on, I had been just into Linux pretty much nonstop, with a couple of dips back into Windows because I couldn't get something working right on Linux. But I've figured everything out that I need to use now, so I'm 100% Linux 100% of the time at this point. So with my Linux experience, man, I've run the gamut. I started on Elementary OS. I installed Ubuntu. I've installed Debian. I've installed Arch. I've installed Garuda. I've installed Manjaro. I've installed Artix. I've kind of like got a good sampling of a lot of different things. For desktop environments, I've done most of them, GNOME or GNOME, KDE Plasma, which is what I use now, XFCE, Mate or Mate, and oh man, now the name is escaping me. The one that's based on GNOME, but kind of like the stripped down version, Budgie. So I've run with a lot of stuff, and I always kind of like felt a little dirty, and wanting something a little bit more pure. And that's what ultimately led me to Arch. That's probably what's leading you to Arch as well. But the installation was always a little intimidating for Arch. I'd go on Reddit and I would see people bragging almost about how easy it was or how hard it was. Like they'd be saying, Arch is kind of easy to install. Anyone who does it just needs to learn how to read the wiki. Other people would be like, yeah, I've tried installing Arch 4 times. I still can't get it working. And so I was a little intimidated by that. And my first couple Arch installs actually were done via the Anarchy installer, which I think is a great installer. Whomever is maintaining that is doing a fantastic job. Shout out to the Anarchy installer because it's great. But even using the Anarchy installer left me feeling a little guilty, like I wasn't doing it the right way. So I finally strapped myself in and learned how to read the wiki and how to install Arch. And that's kind of the process I'm going to take you through right now. So you can see that I have booted here just the basic ISO, the Arch ISO that you can download straight from archlinux.org. I'm going to skip a couple of steps from the wiki. I think they start with, verifying the image. I don't really do that. I know it's probably best practice to do that, but I trust where I'm getting my ISO from. So if you don't, you can always verify the image. Again, that's probably best practice, but I'm going to skip that. I'm also going to skip connecting my Wi-Fi. You can see here at the top that they want you to authenticate the wireless network using IWCTL utility. That's a pretty basic set of instructions on their wiki. So if you need to connect your Wi-Fi card, just check out the wiki and follow it along. It's just like a command to scan for wireless networks, a command to connect to a wireless network, a command to put in the password, and then they want you to like ping something to make sure that you're getting a connection, which is actually where I'm going to start right now. So I always like to just make sure that I'm connected to the internet because this ISO doesn't come with all of the packages that you're going to need to install Arch. It just comes with the packages required to download the stuff that you're going to need to install Arch. So you are going to need internet connection to install Arch, and that's not going to be the case with some other distributions that come with all of that pre-packaged. I think Artix does this, but Artix isn't systemd. I I think I have that right. But anyway, so I'm going to start here. Oh, let me make sure that my mouse is actually on. And I'm going to ping archlinux.org. And what that's going to do is it's just going to verify that I'm receiving packages from a website, which is really just shorthand of saying, yes, you're connected to the internet, everything's good. I'm going to hit Command C to stop pinging. I know I'm connected to the internet. I can move on to my next step, which for me is going to be creating my partition tables. And I think this is really, well, actually before I create my partition tables, I'm going to clear my terminal. If you don't know that command, you can either type in clear and that'll clear it, or you can hit Control L and that'll also clear it. I think creating the partition tables is where a lot of people who start the Arch installation process probably give up, because it's the most intimidating. You know, you're about to wipe your hard drive, delete everything, and then if you get stuck and the installation isn't good or something doesn't work with GRUB or whatever it happens to be, you're going to be left without an operating system on your computer. And then if you don't have another way to get like your Windows 10 image or another image to install on your computer, I can understand the trepidation. You know, that's something I felt too. But it's not that bad once you kind of conceptualize what you're trying to look for, what you're trying to do. So first things first, we're using the fdisk utility. I think there's other disk managing utilities available. Fdisk is what I learned to use. I believe it's also what they have on the Arch Wiki. So that's what we're going to use right now. So you want to first fdisk-l, and what that's going to do is it's going to list the drives you have on your computer. So you'll see two drives here, or two devices rather. You're going to see this SDA device, right? Device/dev/SDA1, device/SDA2. That's all my SDA drive. And if you just look up right under the top where it says root at Arch ISO, you'll see disk/dev/SDA : 18 gigabytes, and then, you know, that number in normal bytes. That's my hard drive. And then under that, it says disk/dev/loop0. You can ignore the loop 0. They tell you as much on the Arch Wiki to ignore that. We're not doing anything with loop 0. I'm not even quite sure what loop 0 is, so we're just going to ignore it for the sake of this video. But the important thing is that first disk, the one that probably corresponds with the size of your hard drive, that's your main drive. That's what we're going to be deleting the partitions on, creating a new partition table, and installing our operating system on. So for me, that's SDA. I think for most people, it'll probably be called SDA. It might be called something else, but again, it corresponds probably to the size of your hard drive. So if you have a 256 gig hard drive, you'll probably see 256 GIB up there or something close to that number. So we've listed the disks, we see them, we know what we're trying to work with. So we're going to do the fdisk utility or command again, fdisk command, and we're going to point it at our hard drive, which again is /dev/SDA. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up the fdisk utility with us talking or with us working in our SDA drive. So fdisk has its own set of commands. It doesn't have like the typical bash commands that we're using in a normal Linux terminal. It has its own set of commands that you can see if you type in help. So if you type in help, maybe not help. M for help. There you go. You'll see all of these different modifiers, different commands that you can do with fdisk. The one that we're going to be working with is D, delete a partition. N, create a new partition. Where is that? Add a new partition. And T, which should be change the type of partition. Where does that say it on here? Yeah, change a partition type. So those are going to be the ones that we're working with. I'm going to hit Control L to clear the terminal. It still says Command M for help. That means we're still in the fdisk. And what I'm going to start with is actually deleting my two previous partitions. So I'm going to hit D, enter. Then it's going to ask me to select a partition number. It's going to default to 2. So if you just hit enter again, you're going to delete your second partition. So I'll just hit enter again. Partition 2 has been deleted. I need to delete partition 1 now, so I'm going to hit D again. This time there was only one partition, so it automatically selected partition 1 and deleted partition 1. So at this point, if you can visualize it, if you ever worked with like a graphic user interface program that talks to drives, and it usually has like a big bar there and then lines separating your partitions. What we've just done is clicked a line or clicked a partition and deleted it, and it became unallocated space. And we did that for both of the partitions we had on our drive. So at this point, all I have is unallocated space. So now I need to create some allocated space, right? I need to tell the computer where to install certain things. In this tutorial, I'm only going to be doing 2 partitions. I'm going to be doing a boot partition, and I'm going to be doing your root partition. If you have need for other partitions, like if you're trying to dual boot another installation, you might want to create a 3rd partition for that installation. Or if you're creating a swap partition, you can also create a swap partition in this step. You can check the Arch Wiki for a little bit more information on how to create swap partitions. I think in this day and age, swap partitions probably aren't super necessary anymore. The way I understand them is it was just a way to kind of like preserve programs or preserve operations when you were starting to cap out on your RAM. But now everyone is running 16 gigabytes, 32, 64 gigabytes of RAM. The chances that you're going to cap your RAM are pretty low. I've only got 8 gigabytes of RAM on this machine, and I very, very rarely run out of RAM, especially now that I'm running Arch instead of Windows. So anyway, back to the task at hand, we need to create our new partitions. So that command is N, and hit N, hit Enter. And I'm going to create a primary partition, not an extended partition. I'm not entirely sure what extended partitions do. Again, I don't have an IT background, but I know that I've never needed to do it. So I've just kind of ignored it. And you can see that the default is P. So I'm going to hit Enter again, or you can hit P, Enter. And then it's going to ask you what you want your partition number to be. This is my first partition, my boot partition. So it defaults to 1. Just hit Enter. Now within your drive, you need to set where your sectors are starting and how big your sectors are. Or not, excuse me, not how big your sectors are, but how big your partition is going to be. So I'm starting the first sector at the beginning of my drive, so I don't need to change this. I just hit Enter. My last sector, or how big I want my partition to be, you can either do it by sector, if you know like the byte conversion, which I don't, or you can do it by size, how big you want your partition to be, which I do know. So I'm going to hit plus, and I'm going to make it a 512 megabyte partition. So plus 512 capital M. The boot partitions don't need to be especially large. I've never had an issue with having this be my partition size. I don't know if you can run it smaller. I'm sure you can run it bigger, but half a gig has done it for me. So that's kind of where I just leave it. In my mind, half a gigabyte is plenty of space for a boot. Again, I might be wrong on that, but it works for me. So I'm going to hit Enter. It says created a new partition 1 of type Linux and a size of 512 megabytes. Partition 1 contains a VFAT signature. This is a leftover from my previous install. So yes, I want to remove that signature. You probably, if you're doing a clean install, you might not see this prompt, which is fine. That just means you don't have a file system associated yet with your partition. So I'm going to remove that signature. The signature will be moved by the right command. We'll come to that later. So now I've got my first little partition, 512 megabytes, my boot partition. And so I need to make sure that that is going to become my boot partition. So I need to change the type of partition it is with the T command. Oh, sorry, lowercase t. Selected partition number 1, hex code or alias, type L to list all. So if you need to know the type of signatures that we can have here, or the types of partitions we can have here, hit L, you'll be greeted with this command. I know that I need to boot a UEFI system, which there at the bottom, aliases, has some common ones: Linux, swap, extended, UEFI, RAID, LVM, Linux, X, EX. I don't know what that is. I don't know what most of these are, to be honest. But I do know that I need a UEFI system, so I'm going to type in EF, and it says change the type of partition Linux to EFI. So that's where I want to be. So I've got my boot partition finished. My next step is to create my root partition. So I'm going to do it the same way. I'm going to start with N, the new partition command. I'm going to select P. It's going to be a primary partition type. And this time, default to, correct, it's my second partition. I've already created the first one. First sector is going to start where the last drive ended. So again, I don't need to edit this. I'm just going to hit enter. And last sector is going to end where my drive ends, which is the rest of my, the rest of my hard drive. So if you're doing another partition after this, you might want to specify how big you want this hard drive to be, or this partition to be. You might only want to allocate 40 gigabytes, in which case you would type 40 capital G, and that's a 40 gigabyte drive. In my case, I'm just using the rest of my drive because I don't intend on creating any more partitions. So I'm just going to hit enter and leave it as default. And then it says partition 2 contains a Btrfs signature. Do you want to remove the signature? I do. That's again left over from a previous install. We'll be coming back to that in a second. So now I've deleted my drives. I've set up my 2 partitions. So I've allocated my space. I've set my boot partition to an EFI partition so that it can talk to the bootloader okay. And at this point, I just need to write the changes. So I'm going to hit the write command, which is W, enter, and it writes. So you can see the output from the terminal. The partition table has been altered, calling IOCTL to reread partition table, syncing disks, and then we're back to our original root prompt. So if I hit Control L, we can move on to the next step, which is creating our actual file system. So we've got our partitions. Now we need to assign a file system to those partitions. So since we have 2 partitions, we have to do this step twice, right? We have to assign a file system to partition 1 and a file system to partition 2. So partition 1 was my boot partition, right? The first partition needs to be FAT32 for boot. So the command, you can get this on Arch Linux, is going to be mkfs. That's the command. And then dot whatever your file system is going to be. For me, that's FAT or FAT. FAT32 is what we're installing. And then I need to point it to the drive that I'm assigning it to. So for me, that's going to be dev, right? Dev SDA is the drive, but it's SDA1, the first partition on our SDA. And then when I hit enter, it goes through. No errors. We're good to go. We need to do the same thing now for our second partition, which is going to be our root partition. So if you go on the Arch Wiki, you can find a number of different file systems that Arch supports. I think the fashionable one right now is Btrfs. That's the one I currently use. I don't, to be honest, experience a difference between like ext4 or Btrfs, or I don't know if I've used another one, but all the cool kids are using Btrfs, so I use Btrfs too. So I'm going to make file system, makefs, mkfs, and this time I'm going to use btrfs, Btrfs, and I'm going to assign that to drive 2. At this point, if you don't want to use Btrfs, you don't have to. If you want to use ext4, which I think is probably the more common, or I'm assuming it's the most common, you would just do mkfs.ext4 and then still point it to your second drive here. So the output shows me what I just created. You can take a look at that if you need to. But we're done with our partitions. We're done with our file system. Now we're ready to actually start installing things. So I'm going to clear the terminal. That's Control L. And I'm going to, with my next step, set up my mirrors. If you're coming from Windows especially, mirrors might be something new to you. Mirrors and repositories might not be common language for you because you're probably used to just like going to Google or a search engine and typing in the program you need and scrolling through the first several links until you see the website that you recognize that one time you had to install it, and then you download the installer and then you run the installation. That's kind of how you're used to getting programs. If you're coming from Mac OS, you're probably used to the concept of a repository, but maybe not by that name, because the App Store on Mac OS is the de facto repository for Mac OS. That's where companies will host their programs, right? They'll have them essentially published by Apple or hosted on the web App Store, and then you just go there for everything you need. When I was running Mac OS, it was pretty rare when I would need to go to a browser to install a program that wasn't available on the App Store. Pirated content, obviously notwithstanding. But with Linux, most distributions have their own sets of repositories where they host the programs that they've compiled specifically for their distribution. And there's a ton of overlap between the major repositories. Most, I would say, standardized Linux programs like VLC or Firefox or LibreOffice, all of those are going to be on pretty much every official distribution's repository, or every distribution's official repository. So that's what we need to kind of set up at this point. So we're going to update our mirrors, which are just different geographical locations that we can access this content. So based on where you are globally or regionally, that's going to be where you want to set your mirrors. So in order to do that, first we have to update our package manager, pacman. So we're going to type in pacman, pacman, and then we're going to force sync a repository here, or force sync the repositories, update them. Just make sure that what our computer is getting from these mirrors or getting from the repositories is the most current information, or the most current packages. So now that that's updated, our package databases, now that those are updated, we can run the package called reflector, the command called reflector. And what that's going to do is it's going to grab us the fastest mirrors, the fastest repositories, the fastest mirrors for these repositories based on our region. So the command that I learned is reflector -c, which is asking us for our region or our country. So we're in the US. I think F is find. So we're going to find 12 of them. I forget what L means, but L10. And then we're going to keep, I think, the top 10 or the top 12 fastest of these. And then we're going to save those, right, -- save, in the file where they belong, which is /etc/pacman.d/mirror list. So again, that command, if you're following along, reflector -c, quote, capital US quote, -F12, -L10, -N12, -- save /etc/pacman.d/mirror list. And we're going to let that run and update our mirrors so that we can move on to the next installation step. And this usually takes a second. I've done it without specifying how much I want, and it takes forever. It goes, I think, through thousands of mirrors. So if you limit it just to the top 12 mirrors, it goes a lot faster. Cool. So we've updated our mirrors, we've run reflector, and now we're ready to install Arch. And so I'm going to clear the terminal, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Arch installation. So Arch as an operating system doesn't have any sort of graphical front end. It's all just through the terminal. So when you install Arch via the wiki, it only takes you up through the terminal installation. It doesn't actually give you any sort of graphical interface options until you get to, I think it's the next page where they tell you how to install some desktop environments. So I'm going to be kind of doing both in this. I just wanted you to be aware that if you only install Arch through the wiki and then you reboot your computer, you're just going to be greeted with a flashing terminal. You're like, well, where's my computer? Well, you need to install a desktop environment still. But anyway, we're going to install Arch proper right now, and then we'll get to the desktop environment at the end of the installation process. So first things first, to install, we need to mount our root partition. So we're going to use the mount command. And then we need to point it to our root partition, which if you remember was /dev/sda, and it was our second partition. So sda2, and then we need to point that to the mounted directory. So /mnt. So now we've mounted our drive, and we're going to use the packstrap command. This comes from the Arch Wiki as well. The way I kind of understand packstrap, I might be wrong on this, is it kind of functions similar to the package manager pacman, but it allows us to point it to a mounted drive where it will install the packages we need to get going. In this case, it's like all the Linux packages. So it's the kernel and associated programs or packages that we need to access and run further commands later down the line. So we're going to point packstrap to what we just mounted, the /mnt, and then we're going to install a couple of different things here. We're going to install the base packages with base. We're going to install Linux, the kernel, with just Linux. We're going to install Linux firmware, which I believe gives me the ability to actually interact with the kernel. And we also, since we installed Btrfs, we need to install btrfs-progs, Btrfs programs or progs. And what that's going to do is allow when the Linux kernel gets built, or when the init rf rams I don't know, something like that, when the Linux kernel gets rebuilt, it won't give us an error because there's some like confusion without the Btrfs progs when it tries to build the kernel. Install the kernel, build the inits, terminology that I kind of only have a passing understanding of. And last, we need to install a editor, a file editor. And so some people might use Nano. I prefer to use Vim because it's colorful and I like color. No, it just makes when it's color coded, it makes it easier to pick out certain things from the text. Nano is a good editor. I think that's probably what most people use when they're starting out. But the problem with Nano is everything's just black and white, so it gets kind of difficult to see where you need to be uncommenting things. Vim is a little bit easier in that regard. So I like to install Vim. And at that point, I hit enter. It syncs my databases. It starts the installation process. So you can see right there packages as it scrolls away, what packages are being installed. You can also see them populating the terminal right now, total 70, 80 out of 118. They download pretty fast. They're all pretty small. And we also have like these nice fast mirrors that we've established in the earlier step. So this process should only take a minute or two, tops. But you can see there, just downloaded the Linux kernel. It's downloading the Linux firmware. Those are your two largest packages by far. The rest are just kind of like little things that are needed to run them. And then it installed Vim, and we're good to go. And so it's going to check the package integrity, and then it's going to install them all. And really, at this point, once this finishes up, you've installed Arch. Arch has been installed. It hasn't been configured yet. You don't have a desktop environment. There's not really a whole lot of like usability to the operating system yet, but it's installed. So this is what I mean. This part, building image from preset, this is what I was trying to say earlier about it, like building the kernel. I don't really know what the proper terminology is, but if you don't install the Btrfs progs package, when it gets to this last part, it'll pop out an error saying, there's some inconsistency or incompatibility there. All right. So congratulations, Arch is installed. You can say I use Arch, by the way, now. You're good to go. But we need to finish up so we can have a usable computer. So the next part now is to configure Arch. So step one in configuring Arch is to generate the fstab file. I'm not really sure what fstab does, but every video I've seen and every installation guide I've seen, and on the Arch Wiki, they have me do this step. I've never actually read the subwiki for fstab, so I'm not entirely sure what it does, but I know you need to do it, so I got in the habit of doing it. So we're going to use the command gen, Jen, fstab, fstab, dash capital U. We're doing it in our mount directory, and we're pointing it, we're creating that file in /mnt/etc/fstab. We have that command there, generates the fstab. Again, I don't know what it means, but we got it. And now we need to change the root to what we just mounted in the previous step, so we can start interacting directly with our root directory, which will be important when we actually install an operating system. So we need to drop down into a different root, and the way we do that is arch-ch, change root, so arch chroot, and then we're going into our mounted drive here /mnt. So now you can see our little terminal name, our little prompt there has changed colors. Now we're interacting directly with our root directory instead of whatever we were doing before. So at this point, I like to change my time zone, make sure that my system clock is all set up correctly. So the way we do that is time date CTL, right? Time date control. And you can run a list time zones if you don't know what yours is called, and it'll populate with pretty much every geographical area you can possibly imagine. I'm in Los Angeles, so I'm looking for America/Los Angeles. So depending on your region, that'll look different. You can see America/Los Angeles at the bottom. I'll hit Control C to exit that. And now I can set my time zone now that I know what it's called. So that's time date CTL, again, same command, and this time set time zone instead of list time zones. So set time zone, and then you just, whatever yours is called, mine is called America /Los_Angeles. So that's how I'm going to set it. So that's set. Moving on, I need to set up my locale. And so that begins with needing to uncomment your generalized language setting. I don't really know what it is, but you need to uncomment it from the a specific file that we're going to get to in a second, so that you can build the locale based off of that. So let's jump into Vim. So I'm going to use Vim. That's my editor. And I need to edit that file, which is located in /etc/locale.gen, right? That's the file. That's the directory, etc. The file is locale.gen. And then we see, when I say comments, that might be an unfamiliar term for you guys. Comments are just these little pound signs, these hashtags. In whatever language this is written in, comments tell the computer or tell the compiler or whatever it's called to skip this. So it's like the computer can't read anything behind a comment. And so you'll notice that everything is commented here. We need to uncomment our language setting, I believe this is. And so for me, that's going to be English US. So I'm going to scroll down here, English US.ftc. I'm going to hit I, which is the insert command, and I'm going to delete the comment. Then I'm going to hit escape, which ends the insert command. Then I'm going to hit colon, which allows me to interact with Vim. And I'm going to write the change with the W command, and I'm going to quit Vim with the Q command. So after I've uncommented it, I'm going to hit escape. Then I'm going to hit colon, WQ, enter. And then it tells me there at the bottom that I've written my changes. Control L to clear the terminal. All right. So we've uncommented, we've set up the locale file, we've uncommented the preferred language, and now we need to generate the locale config and write our preferred language. So the way we do that is just a series of commands. The first one is the command locale-gen, that's going to generate it. And see, if we had run that command without uncommenting our preferred language, this wouldn't have done anything. That's why we needed that first step. And then we're going to use the echo command to write this, capital Lang, right, our language. We're going to set our language to what we just uncommented, which for me was en underscore capital US dot capital UTF dash 8. And we're going to write that into this file here, /etc /locale.conf. And after that, we're going to export that same thing, lang. So we're going to use the export command to do this, equals en underscore us dot UTF dash 8. And at that point, our language and time zones have all been created. We're all good to go. We can move on to the next thing, which is creating our hosts. So let's set up our network. So first things first, setting up the network, we need to write our network name, computer name. I forget what this is called. I believe it's our computer's name. We need to write that to the file where it belongs. So we're going to again use the echo command. My computer is just going to be called Arch. You might want to call it something different. You might want to call it the model of your computer. You might want to call it like Billy Bob's Great Arch Adventure. I don't really care what you call it, but it needs to be, it needs to be all lowercase. Okay? Don't put any capitals or spaces. I'm not sure if you can put underscores. I just got in the habit of calling it Arch or like sometimes T40S because that's my computer's model number. But I just leave it at Arch now. You can do like Arch install if you want, whatever you want. But just make sure that it's all lowercase. So I'm going to write that name, and where am I going to write it? Got to point it to the right directory, right file, which is going to be /etc host name. There we go. So now that the host name has that file, if you want to verify that you actually wrote it in there, you can jump into that same file with your Vim. So if I point Vim toward that host name, you'll see that Arch has been written there. We're good to go. So :Q to quit Arch. I'm going to clear the terminal, Control L. All right, so we've written the host name here. We're going to use the touch command on /etc/hosts. And now we're going to edit what we just created, which is, again, we're using the Vim editor. So vim, and we're going to point it to what we just created, /etc/hosts. We're going to hit I to get into the insert mode. Come to the end, enter. When you create a new line in Vim, it's going to start automatically with a comment. So make sure you delete that comment. And now we need to set up our, I believe this is the host or home directory, not directory. I forget what it's called, but this is like pretty common, pretty uniform on all the operating systems I've run into. And I believe I got this straight from Arch Wikis or Arch Linux Wiki. So this is how I do it. First one is 127.0.0.1, 5 spaces or a tab. As long as it's consistent, it shouldn't matter. Localhost. Then we come down here, ::1. Again, as long as it's consistent, shouldn't matter if you're using spaces or tabs. Quote me on that. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. I always use tabs. I've never had an issue with tabs, so I'm not actually sure if you can use spaces. If you run into an issue and your computer lights on fire, it's probably because you use spaces instead of tabs. 127.0.1.1. And this time, instead of localhost, you're going to put whatever your host name was, which for me was Arch. Then I'm going to hit escape, hit colon. I'm going to use the W command to write and the Q command to quit, and then enter. So it's been written. You got the confirmation there at the bottom. Now we're moving on to setting our password and creating some new users. So Control L. We're going to create our root password by simply typing PASSWD. That's the password command. When you hit enter, it'll prompt you for a new password. My password is 1234. It's very safe and very secure, highly recommended. And retype new password 1234. Password updated successfully. Good to go on that. Now at this point, I don't think the Arch Wiki and many other like guides that I've seen online tell you how to install, or not install, how to create another user profile. It's strongly, strongly discouraged doing a lot of work in the root directory or with your root user or super user, whatever it's called. It's strongly discouraged to do that by default. So in Windows, you pretty much default always to the administrator. And if you don't, you're always like right clicking stuff going, hey, I'm the administrator, I'm the administrator. And what that does is it just gives whatever program you're installing or whatever packages you're installing direct access to the root of your computer, which is how, a lot of like vulnerabilities are exposed, how a lot of viruses are installed, the way I understand it. So everything I've read says like, just don't use the root directory or don't use the root user ever. If you need to access the root or get root privileges, that's what super users for, sudo, right? Super user do. So just don't do it. And then they never tell you how to install or create a new user that doesn't have, that has super user privileges on command, but not the root directory. So like when you boot Arch for the first time, you're just going to be the super user. You're going to be at the root. So I don't know why they don't tell you explicitly to do this during the installation, but I just got in the habit of doing it now after I create my root password. So now I'm going to create a new user. So first, to do that, I need to use my package manager, pacman, and I need to -S is sync. I need to reinstall sudo, super user do, the package that allows you to access the root temporarily through the terminal. Actually, it's not even reinstalling it, it's just installing it. So proceed with the installation, yes. So that's step one. Step two now is to create your new user account. So that's going to be the user add command --create -home. And then whatever you want your username to be. Again, same thing as before. This needs to be all lowercase. So for me, I'm going to name it after myself, Ambro. And then I'm going to hit enter. And it says I did something wrong. Oh, I misspelled create. So I'm going to try that again, clear the terminal. I can press up to get to my previous command, and you'll notice when I go backwards, it says create instead of create. So I need to put an E there and run that again. I've created my username. At this point, I want to create a password for it. So I'm going to follow the same process as before, PASWD, password. And this time I'm going to tell it I want to change Ambro's password. So password space Ambro. It's going to ask for a new password. I would recommend setting this different than your root password. If you have multiple passwords you use, just make sure that they're different. For this installation, I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 again. Oh, also, if you're new to this, don't get freaked out that there's not like asterisks here. It doesn't look, it won't look like anything. Usually when you type in passwords, it'll be like asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The first time I got really freaked out using the terminal when I was asking for a password because I was typing and nothing was showing up. I'm used to it now, but it would kind of like threw me for a loop. I was like, what's happening? My computer's frozen. I had to Google it, and then I felt stupid because it's like, yeah, of course it doesn't show the password. You don't want people knowing how long your password is. Anyway, so password updated successfully. And now I want to give this user super user privileges with the sudo command or sudo command, so I can install packages to the root with this user. So I don't always have to just go into my root user. I can give it super user do privileges. And in order to do that, I need to use the usermod command. So usermod -- append, I'm altering it, groups space wheel space Ambro. So I'm going to add Ambro to the wheel group, which we'll come to in a second. And so now we need to use the vsudo command, which is kind of like the Vim editor, but it's V. I think Vim is like an offshoot of V or like the sequel to it or something. I don't know. And we're editing what sudo can do. So this is the sudoers file. And it says here at the top, this file must be edited with the vsudo or vsudo command as root. So that's why we're doing this now instead of later. So we need to uncomment just one thing. If you scroll down relatively far, if you're using vsudo, which they say you have to, it'll be in color here. You'll see root all equals all. Under that, it says uncomment to allow members of a group will to execute any command. That's what we're interested in. We've already added ourselves to wheel, so we're going to uncomment that. So that way anyone in the wheel group, of which we just made ourselves, can execute root commands with the sudo command in a terminal, if that makes sense. I might be butchering that completely, but this is what we want to do. It does work. So then we're going to hit escape. We're going to hit colon. We're going to hit W to write and Q to quit. And it takes us out. You can see that it's successfully been written. We're good to go there. We have our new user. So Control L to clear the terminal. And now I like to install a bootloader next. So this is kind of an optional step with Arch. I think the default bootloader for Arch is systemd-boot, which is fine. But if you plan on installing multiple instances of Linux on different partitions, you need a way to view those partitions during boot so you can boot from different partitions. I just got in that habit of installing a bootloader or a boot manager. I'm not exactly sure what it's called. And the one that I kind of defaulted to, which I think is probably close to like the standardized version or the standardized program, is called GRUB, which I forget what it stands for. Maybe graphical user boot. I don't know. GRUB. Look it up yourself. Okay, I'm not your dictionary. All right, so we're going to install GRUB. So in order to install GRUB, we need to use our package manager, which is pacman. We need to -sync, right, -s, and install GRUB, so GRUB. And we also need to install the EFI boot manager, so EFI bootmgr. Proceed with installation. By the way, again, you might not be as familiar with this. It kind of took me a couple minutes to realize that I didn't need to keep typing yes or no to these sorts of prompts. When it says proceed with installation, bracket, capital Y / lowercase n bracket, that the capital Y means it's going to default to yes if you hit enter. So when it says proceed with installation, you don't need to keep hitting Y, just hit enter. Cool. So those packages have been installed. And now we need to mount our boot directory. So first, let me clear the terminal. Control L. We need to make the boot directory. So we're going to use the make directory command, which is mkdir. And then we need to tell it what to make. So that's going to be /boot /EFI. For me, I have an EFI system. Yours is probably the same, but it might be different. Consult the Arch Wiki if it is. At that point, we need to mount it. So remember, it was our first, this is going way back in the video, our first partition that we made was our boot partition. So that's what we need to mount here. So that's going to be /dev/sda1, not 2. 2 is our root partition that we're working in currently. We need to mount the boot partition, which was the first one we created. And we need to tell that where to mount, which is the directory we just created. So that command there, mount our boot drive to the boot directory. And so we're going to do that, get it successfully mounted. And now we need to install GRUB. And so the way we install GRUB, this is different than syncing GRUB, which is what we just did from our repository. Now we actually need to install it. So we need to use the grub-install command. We need to point it toward our target, which is our architecture. So --target equals, I don't believe that vanilla Arch supports any other architecture except for x86. So if you got something different here, then you're probably further along your Linux journey than I am, and you don't need to be watching this video. So x86_64-EFI. We need to tell Linux what our bootloader is, so that's going to be --bootloader ID. So bootloader -ID equals capital grub, all capitalized. And then we need to point it to the EFI directory. So that's going to be dash dash EFI directory, which is equals the directory that we just created and mounted our boot drive to. So it's going to be equals slash boot slash EFI. Hit enter. Installation finished. No error reported. That is always a fantastic sign. If you get an error reported here, it's probably due to a typo. So just comb through what you did in your previous command. Remember, you can hit up to get to your previous command. Comb through that and see where your typo is and just fix it. Otherwise, try retyping everything again, go a little bit slower, run the command again, and see if you can finish without an error. At this point, I got in the habit of downloading another package for GRUB. So that's going to be pacman-s grub/btrfs. I don't know if this is actually necessary at this point. I've had a few failed installations with Btrfs because I'm still kind of getting used to it. But this seems to always work when I do it here. So I'm just going to sync that package. It's going to rebuild my init frames, init CPOs, whatever this is doing, it's going to do it again. It's also going to do this when we install our desktop environment. So this happens a lot. I've never had an issue doing it here at this point. It feels safe to me, so I just do it. You can experiment not doing it. I don't know if it's going to change anything. But the last step here is to configure GRUB, or make the configuration file rather. So that's going to be grub-mkconfig -o. And then we need to specify the configuration file, which exists in /boot/grub/grub.cfg. And we're good to go there. Hopefully. Always a crapshoot. All right, and if you've gotten to this point, you're finally ready to install your desktop environment. Hopefully you're loving Arch. I know everyone is loving Arch at this point. It's not that bad of a process. Now I'm going to clear the terminal, Control L, and now I'm going to install the desktop environment. I'm going to do this in several different steps because I'm running a virtual machine on a kind of weak computer while I'm recording via OBS. So I'm not entirely sure if this is going to crash my system. I've had it crash before if I try to do too much too fast. So I'm going to play it safe, and I'm going to do this in small different steps. So I'm going to use my package manager, pacman, to sync -s xorg. That's going to be step 1. So you can also do Wayland here. Since I'm installing the KDE Plasma desktop environment, that doesn't really play very well with Wayland. Wayland is still kind of like a 80%, 90% completed, what would you call it, display manager? But Xorg seems to work better with it, so I just install Xorg. I believe if you go to the Arch Wiki and look up how to install KDE Plasma, they also say install Xorg, so we're installing Xorg. Enter a selection, default equals all, hit enter. Proceed with installation, capital Y, hit enter. This one takes a minute. This is kind of a large installation, 365 megabytes. When we actually install KDE Plasma, that's going to be even bigger, so that'll take some more time. So it'll check the package, check the keyring, install all the stuff. It's always nice when you see completed installations. And we're good. Success. Clear the terminal. At this point, now I'm going to install, so that's pacman-s, capital S. I'm going to install the Plasma desktop. So at this point in your installation, feel free to install other desktops. Consult the Arch Wiki if you want a different desktop environment. They might take you through a couple of different steps to get it. You might need to install different dependencies depending on what you're looking at. I know that Xorg was required to install Plasma, which is why we just did that. If you're installing GNOME or GNOME, you might need to be installing like some Wayland support. I'm not entirely sure. It's been a long time since I've used GNOME on Arch. Or if you're using XFCE or Mate or Budgie or whatever you're using, just consult the wiki at this point. For this guide, we're going to be installing Plasma. Also, even within Plasma, there are different like flavors, not flavors, but like sizes of Plasma. So you can install like the Meta Plasma package, which comes with like everything ever written for KDE Plasma. So if you're kind of like coming from the normie background, you might want that because it's going to include stuff like, you know, Bluetooth support. It's going to include like synaptic drivers for your touchpad if you're on a laptop. It's going to include a lot of different things that might not be included in the base Plasma package. The downside of that is you're going to be installing probably a lot of stuff you also don't need really. So if you're kind of a little bit more comfortable, then you can just install Plasma like I'm doing and check out the packages that are coming with it. There's a lot here. This is like really what you need to just get the desktop environment working. There's an even smaller one called, I think it's Plasma-Desktop, which is like as bare bones as you can get. A good example is if you look on repository extra #1 Blue Devil there, that's to allow the settings application in KDE Plasma to have like a graphical front end for Bluetooth devices. So that doesn't come with Plasma-Desktop. So you'd have to install that after the fact. So this is the one I found that works the best for Plasma. I don't need all the bloat from the meta packages. And I think KDE Plasma-Desktop just forces me to do a lot of like repetitive work for downloading stuff that I probably would have downloaded anyway. But if you scroll through here, there's probably stuff that you don't want or don't need. Like you might not need the K-Wayland integration. You might not want K-Wallet. I don't really know what your usage situation's like, but I think this is probably just a good one to do. So I'm going to hit default all. There are 8 providers for TTF font. I don't care. Do the default. There are 2 providers for phone on Qt5 backend. I don't know. Do the default. And then install. And you can see this one is much larger, 1.8 gigabytes or thereabout. So this one's going to take a second. I'll probably speed up the video during this point. Okay, so we're back after installing the Plasma desktop environment. There's a few more packages I want to install before I exit out of here and reboot. Well, I'll do this all together. This might actually reinstall some packages, but this is just something I've kind of like built into my standard operating procedure for installing Arch. So I need a display manager. So if you're on GNOME, that might be GDM. For me, I use SDDM, which is, I think, Simple Display Manager, something like that. So we're going to do pacman-s sddm. Install our display manager. I also want to install BlueEZ or BlueZ, which is a Bluetooth interface, and BlueZ-utils. And then I also am going to need the console. So KDE Plasma doesn't come, KDE Plasma with the package we installed doesn't come with console. Console is going to be our terminal emulator. This is going to be much nicer to install here than trying to do it from the graphical user interface. I couldn't actually figure out a way to install console without console or like a browser or anything. So then I had to like come back into here, change root down to the directory and install the console again anyway. So I just do it now at this point. I also like ZSH, Zish. That's kind of like a terminal language almost. The default is Bash. Zish is based on Bash, I believe, but it allows me to do a little bit of ricing, make it a little bit prettier, and we'll save that for another video. So I use Zish. That allows me to install OhmyZish and a lot of like different terminal applications, I guess they would be called, and theming. And then I also install base-devel, which is like, I believe, developer tools, but it allows me to install a Arch user repository helper, an AUR helper, which we'll talk about at a later time. But you need to be able to access the fake root in order to do that, and that's part of the base-devel package. So at that point, I'm going to hit enter. Yeah, a couple of them are getting reinstalled. It looks like BlueEZ was already there.
and it looks like SDDM was already there, so we're just going to reinstall it. I'm going to enter for base development. They have all of these different things. I'm just going to install them all and proceed with installation. This should go pretty fast. All right, looks like that finished up. Clear the terminal. And now I just need to enable a couple of different services to make sure that it boots properly and that things are just working. So this is something that you're going to have to get used to doing in Arch when you install like printers, for example. When you install the cups package, CUPS, you're going to have to enable that so that you can actually interact with it. So we're going to enable some services here. First one we're going to enable with systemctl, that's the command, enable, is the sddm.service. And that's going to, when we boot our operating system, it's going to take us to like a welcome screen. It's going to take us to SDDM. So created a symlink there. Next one we want to create is systemctl enable, capital N network, capital M manager, all one word, .service. And this is going to activate like our Wi-Fi card, our network manager. Created a symlink there. And then the last one I want to enable is systemctl space enable, same command, Bluetooth.service, so we can hook up Bluetooth devices. Control L to clear the terminal. And at this point, we're ready to finish it. So we want to exit our root with the exit command. So we're back, way back to where we were. And that took 31 minutes. That's going to be kind of a long video. And then I like to unmount the directory here so that it doesn't get hicced up. There's no hiccups when I reboot my system with unmounting this drive. So I'm going to use the umount command, umount -r/mnt. And I believe that the Arch Linux Wikipedia recommends doing this as well. So I'm unmounted and we're good. Now I'm going to reboot my system with the reboot command. Now, if you're doing this on a physical computer, when you reboot, I would actually probably recommend doing the power off command. So that way you have time to take out your installation media, or usually like your USB thumb drive, so that it doesn't accidentally boot from the USB. So it'll boot from the drive that we just created. So I don't need to do that because I'm on a virtual machine. I'm just going to use the reboot command. If you do the reboot command, once it reboots, pop it out before it boots again. And so we're introduced here to GRUB. We're going to use GRUB to boot into Arch Linux. Starting whatever version of Arch that is, 248.3-2-Arch. And we're welcomed here. I'm a little cut off. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Hopefully that's not being cut off on OBS. But anyway, we're graded here now into SDDM, and we can use the password that we set earlier in the installation. Mine was 1234 to log into our desktop environment. And we should be greeted with the vanilla KDE Plasma experience. So here's KDE Plasma in all its 800 by 600 glory. 600 by 800, something by something. And we're going to talk about ricing or customizing KDE Plasma to make it a little bit more, I don't know, pretty. I'm kind of a stickler for aesthetics in that regard. But if you like just the basic Windows 7, Windows 10 experience, then you'll feel right at home in vanilla KDE Plasma. You might not want to change anything at all. You might like it exactly like this. That's awesome. That's great for you. I don't. So next video, we're going to rice it. So stay tuned for that. And hopefully you guys got something out of this installation process. I know it was kind of long. It was kind of wordy. Honestly, I can get through the entire installation process now in about like 5 to 10 minutes, just because, you know, I have my protocol all written down. I know exactly what I want to do. But I tried, as best I could to at least give you a little bit more context for what's happening on your computer as you're installing it, so that when you go through this process again, because you will, you're not going to be so dead in the water if you're working directly from the Arch wiki, which I know can be a little bit intimidating, a little bit convoluted. So I'm going to cut it off there. Thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you when we come back to Rice KDE Plasma. Hi, just a little addendum here. I realized that the desktop screen did get cut off, so I just wanted to make sure that you could see what I was talking about with like the Windows 7, Windows 10 experience down here with KDE Plasma. So yeah, like I said just a second ago, we're going to come back to this and edit it, rice it, as they say in the Linux community, at a later video. Thanks again for watching.